fair few Australians who are very worried about their jobs. They have to face the prospect of being unemployed. What's your position on whether you can increase the New Start allowance by something like $95, which is what some people are calling for, but also whether you can make it easier for people to get it, because there'll be so many people who won't have navigated the Centrelink system before. Can it be easier for them to get it? Can it be increased? And can the mutual obligation requirements be waived?
Well, David, these are exactly the issues that the Expenditure Review Committee, together with Treasurer and I, that we've been addressing in a great amount of detail as we've worked through those, and indeed we'll be meeting again this afternoon. Be putting the final touches on the package of measures that are designed to cushion the blow for exactly the blow that you're talking about. There will be Australians over the next 6 months who, through no fault of their own, will find themselves with less work, with less income, and in the worst case, without a job. That is going to happen. And that's going to happen to quite a number of people. And it's our job to ensure that we do as much as we possibly can to cushion that blow and to put the other arrangements in place, like what has happened today with banks and others, and what we'll seek to do, working through the states and territories for landlords and so on, to ensure that we can provide that support to people through these difficult next 6 months, through this transitional period, through this temporary period. And I can assure you, David, we're giving very close attention to the very things you're talking about, because it will be a difficult and different time. People who have never known themselves to be out of work will be confronted in some cases with that prospect, and we want to make sure that we can help them as best as we can through what will be a difficult period for them and their family. Chris?
Ian, there's ruby princesses off the coast of New South Wales at the moment who had confirmed cases of coronavirus, and let some people off in Sydney. This is the same liner that had the Diamond Princess experience before. So a couple of questions. What are the plans? What do you do with the Ruby Princess? Is there anything that we can do about this company? Has it behaved in an irrational way in continuing to run cruises? And of course, we, like you, are hearing stories from Australians who are now around the world demanding that the Australian government get them home. What's your message to those people?
Well, first of all, I mean, we will apply the same rules in relation to this vessel that have been applied to people getting off planes and things like this. There's the 14-day isolation. There are a small number of cases. My advice is that were identified on that ship. 4, I understand, 3 individuals and 1 crew. Where there are Australians on that ship who are disembarking, they will be going into self-isolation, which means self-isolation, just do it, would be my message on that, to support what the Chief Medical Officer is saying. And those who are internationals will face different rules. So we have got the international ban now coming into place around the country in relation to cruise vessels, and that will be enforced. In relation to those Australians who are in other places, as I said earlier this week, Qantas will continue to be maintaining flights out of a number of key hubs, and that's Los Angeles and London and Hong Kong, I understand, and Auckland and a few other places around the world. And we thank them for continuing to do that. And we're encouraging Australians to make their way home. Air New Zealand, I understand, continue to operate, and the arrangement that Prime Minister Ardern and I came to yesterday means that Australians can transit through Auckland from other places and then across to Australia, and likewise Kiwis can make their way home through Australia on the same basis. So we will just continue to respond to each challenge as it comes, is my response. We have a good framework for dealing with it, a clear set of rules, and we'll seek to apply them. There'll be some exceptional circumstances and cases here and there, but for those Australians who are finding themselves isolated in parts of the world, well, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, I'm particularly aware of the issue that was raised with me yesterday around Lima, where there are Australians who are in places which have already been cut off and you can't get a flight up to LAX or something like that, then the Department of Affairs and Foreign Trade and the Foreign Minister are bringing forward some matters for consideration by the National Security Committee. We'll just go around. I'm going to go. So I'll go to Phil and then I'll come back here and maybe Mark. Yeah, we'll get around everybody.
You sort of flagged further restrictions, if you like, on travel pending the school holidays.
Yep.
Should people who have flights booked, domestic flights booked, start seeking refunds in anticipation of what you might announce next week? And just sorry if I may, secondly on the potential lockdown of some neighbourhoods or so forth, and you flagged, would that be confining people to their homes, closing businesses, that sort of thing?
Well, let me deal with the first one. If there were further advice for me to provide on travel today based on the National Cabinet, I would have certainly done that. We are saying that people should reconsider any unnecessary travel. That is the clear advice, and that comes also with the backing of the medical experts panel. But we will consider further advice on that, and we know that is necessary to do so in time for the school holidays, and we agreed today that we need to do a bit more work on that, and we'll be getting that back on Tuesday. I should stress a couple of things around travel, as I did earlier in the week. As Dr. Murphy has said, the risk of being on a plane is very low. It is very low. The issue is not being on the plane. The issue is moving to different parts of the country and potentially large volumes of populations moving around the country. Now, states and territories are, as you've seen, Tasmania has already made their decision about how that will be treated. Other states may take those decisions for particular parts of their states, and that is entirely appropriate that they may consider doing that. And that's why, as we work through some of those issues, we'll have further advice after the meeting on Tuesday night.
Schools, a year 8 student in Adelaide got the virus from a teacher. How can you leave schools open when this sort of transmission is occurring? And what's your concern? What's your response to concerns from teachers, particularly 40% of which are over 50, that their well-being maybe isn't being considered?
Well, I might let the Chief Medical Officer respond to that question, but in terms of the decision of Premiers, Chief Ministers and myself in taking that advice, that outcome that you mentioned with a single transference, that would not be unexpected when you've got the number of cases increasing. But it still remains the case that the facts are that the incidence of cases amongst younger people is much lower than for the rest of the population, and it is still very much the case that 30% of our health workforce would be compromised if schools were to be shut around the country. Now, we will continue to take advice and we will continue to monitor the situation closely. But the very clear decision of Premiers, Chief Ministers and myself is that schools should remain open. Did you want to add to that, Brendan?
So I think it's really important to recognise that, as we said before, we think the risk to children with this virus is very low. Only 2.4% of all the cases in China and Hubei province were under 19, and there have been very, very, very few significant cases. Obviously, we do have some concerns that children may have a role in transmission, but most children who get the virus seem to have got it from adults, as you've seen in this case. We think that keeping children at home when there's relatively low community spread is probably disproportionate, given that they probably won't stay at home anyway. They may be cared for by elderly grandparents. There may be circumstances where outbreaks in an area are such that we do need to close schools for a period of time. Our view at the moment that this long-haul strategy for the next 6 months, it is in the best interest of everybody to keep schools open, and we think that risk is proportionate.
Second question for you, a cheeky one. Dr. Murphy, what is the latest advice on whether once you've recovered from COVID-19, that you can contract it again? And can I ask the second question is, you talk about Indigenous communities being particularly susceptible. What arrangements, if any, are being made in Alice Springs, where you do have a particular arrangement with the Americans, where Americans can fly in without quarantine or customs to service Pine Gap? What are we doing there? Are we expecting more of the Americans, given that the United States has been a big cause of infection around the world?
Well, let me do the second question. No, is the short answer to that question. The rules we're applying across the board, but in terms of going into more detail about that facility, you would expect me to do that. Ben?
So in terms of reinfection, we can't be absolutely sure, but we think it's very unlikely. There have been a couple of cases of people who have supposedly tested negative and then tested positive, been reported around the world, including one in Japan. But they are very isolated cases. We think it's unlikely that a virus like this that isn't mutating a lot, you would be susceptible to reinfection, but we don't know for sure. Our assumption is that once people have had the infection, that it's unlikely they will get it again.
What sort of tenants relief you're looking at? Would it be rent deferrals? Would it only apply to people who to lose their jobs or the businesses are in distress, and when do you want these states to have a decision on this so it can be enacted?
Well, I'm not going to go into too much detail there because the states are only just commencing the work. New South Wales has been doing already quite a bit of work on this, and so I'm going to allow them appropriately to take the lead on that and to define, I think, a lot of the issues you're setting out there, Mark. In what circumstances, what would be the hardship triggers? Would this wait to waivers or deferrals? Would it relate to deductions, or there are a range of different issues. Remembering also that those who become eligible, I should note, this sort of, I think, goes to a point one of you were asking, I think it was you, David, that in those circumstances you would also trigger, if you were to go on a New Start payment or this job seeker payment, that you also trigger eligibility for a range of other things like the family tax benefit, for rental assistance and things like this. So it's not just the New Start payment, as important as that would be, it is also a range of other payments that you become eligible for. Even if under the New Start taper rates your eligibility for the actual New Start payment is relatively low, you still trigger all the other eligibilities to a range of other payments, which can be quite helpful. And Michelle and then Kath, I will keep going, I think it's...
There's been speculation, Prime Minister, that the government might be willing to take over, to nationalise large companies if the crisis reaches that point, like Virgin, for example. What's your comment on that?
Well, we have no plans along those lines, Michelle. I mean, what we are seeking to do, in a number of cases where we've provided great assistance to private companies to support important supply production in Australia that is essential. And the Minister of Industry, Karen Andrews, has just been doing an outstanding job in progressing a number of those issues. Those broader questions, Michelle, at this stage there are no plans from the government. I wouldn't want that to be misinterpreted. I mean, we are in unprecedented times, but we have no plans to be involved in those sort of nationalisation programs. That is a response that is not justified by what we're seeing or anticipating at present. Kat?
Workers be able to access their sorry.
Make way. Clear some healthy space.
Will workers be able to access their superannuation savings as an income support measure during this crisis?
Well, again, we'll be making further announcements on the next round of measures to cushion the blow for those who are directly impacted, whether they be small businesses or individuals soon. We continue to consider the composition of that package, and when we're in a position to make those announcements, we will. Right, over here, we have any questions over here.
Do you mind perhaps to ask a slightly personal question? You've been working on this coronavirus since January. Are you finding the pace of the job exhausting?
It is very intense, but it's such an important job to provide advice to our governments collectively, and all of the state chief health officers, all of the experts we have been very consistent and unanimous in their advice. So it's a cause that's worth pursuing, but it is pretty intense.
Well, we're working hard to keep up with him. That's what we're doing. But also, I want to say this. I want to thank all of those members of the mental health expert panel and Dr. Murphy and Dr. Kelly. There's been quite a lot of commentary about them, but by all means, have a crack at politicians. We're used to it. We've got broad shoulders. These guys have got a very important job to do, and I would ask you to support them very strongly. We're relying on them, so you can rely on the decisions we're making. The medical experts are giving us incredible advice, very timely. They're working very hard, and they are carrying great responsibilities. They deserve our great respect and our support. Yeah.
Charities sector. So the charities and not-for-profit sector employs around 10% of Australian workers at the moment.
Yep.
They're estimating that their donations and income streams are going to go down by about a third, which translates to potential job losses of around 300,000 people. Is your government going to be doing anything to support them, given that at the moment they're saying that they can't access the business grants and measures that
A job is a job, and we're looking to support people in jobs, and if people find themselves out of work, regardless of where they've been working, then obviously we're seeking to support them. But we're taking a very broad view of the economy. I mean, these are not ordinary times. That means the ordinary rules and the ordinary measures that would apply in these circumstances will need to be changed to reflect that. And so that is very much in our thinking.
You get a sense of the scale here in terms of the indoor bans.
This courtyard will be less than 100 metres long, and it's certainly less than 100 metres wide. You're saying if we put a roof over it, there are too many people in here at the moment?
Not right now, I wouldn't have thought on a quick math, but this is an outdoor gathering, so 500 people could technically be here. But let me say this. These are rules that we're putting in place, I think, to support people making good decisions and enforce appropriate healthy distancing, social distancing to slow the rate. But you have a role to play too, as does everybody, in how they congregate together and ensuring that appropriate distance is being maintained between people. Sure, governments have got to put rules in place and we want to see that enforcement in place, but equally every Australian has a role to play to slow this virus. Don't wait to see a sign, don't wait for any other specific instruction. Do the right thing, do the common sense thing and support each other and you will save lives. Over here.
Some testing criteria. Is there any discussion around relaxing them? It's still a set of people overseas. Sorry, John.
So we are looking actively at relaxing the testing criteria. We are now testing all aged care workers because aged care is such a crucial area. We will be testing healthcare workers with influenza-like illnesses, all people presenting to hospital with pneumonia, in addition to the usual criteria of return travellers and contacts. And we will look at all, as this pandemic develops, we will be continually reviewing the testing criteria.
I'm going to leave it there because we have some other meetings to get to this afternoon. The key thing we're saying today is we're going to keep Australia running. There is a way through this and we need everybody to keep going forward. We need every single Australian to do what they can, whether they're a parent, whether they're a teacher, whether they're a nurse, whether they're a member of parliament, whether a journalist, whatever your job is or whatever you're doing, I need you to keep doing it as much as you can, because if we keep doing it, if we keep holding together, then we will continue to make our way through this. We will get to the other side, and on the other side, Australia will be stronger. Thank you all very much.
Another significant